For more than 3 decades, Jim Carrey has been known as the man whose face could twist into any expression, whose body could bend like rubber, and whose jokes could light up even the darkest room. Millions of people around the world grew up watching him in movies like The Mask, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and Bruce Almighty. He became a symbol of unstoppable joy, someone who seemed to carry endless energy, endless humor, and endless positivity. But while the world laughed with him, very few people ever stopped to ask the real question. How could one man be that funny all the time? What was behind that huge smile? And why did it sometimes feel like the laughter he created came from a place much deeper than simple comedy? Now that Jim Carrey has turned 61, he has begun to speak openly about many things he kept hidden for years. His pain, his struggles, his fears, and the truth about the heavy emotional load he carried all his life. For the first time, he revealed what many people had quietly suspected for decades, that his comedy was not just entertainment, but shield, a way to survive a life filled with poverty, sadness, and heartbreaking pressure. This confession surprised many of his fans, because they had always believed Jim's energy came from happiness. But now they are discovering that his brightest performances were born from some of his darkest experiences. Jim says this truth is important to share because too many people believe that success, money, and fame will fix everything. But as he revealed, it doesn't. His story proves that even the people who make the world laugh can be fighting battles no one else sees. Jim Carrey's journey to fame is often described as lucky or magical, but in reality, it began in a place far from Hollywood glamour. Growing up in Canada, his childhood was filled with stress, poverty, and uncertainty. His father, Percy Carey, was a talented musician and a naturally funny man, but he struggled to support the family. Jim always admired him, describing his father as the real comedian in the family, someone who could make anyone laugh. But when Percy lost his job, the entire Carey family fell into a financial crisis that changed their lives forever. Jim was only a teenager when he had to work long hours after school to help pay the bills, sometimes cleaning factories with his siblings late into the night. At one point, the family became so broke that they had to live in a van parked on the side of the road. Many nights, Jim slept with freezing air blowing through the windows, wrapping himself in blankets to stay warm. He later said that this was where he learned to see the world differently, because when life gets hard, you either break, or you find a way to transform the pain into something powerful. For Jim, that something was comedy. He would practice faces in the mirror for hours, creating bizarre expressions and voices because it made him feel like he still had control over something. These moments shaped the comedian we know today, but he revealed that behind every joke was a boy trying to escape a life that felt impossible. Looking back now at 61, Jim says the world never truly saw the storms he was fighting as a child. They only saw the sunshine that came out of those storms. When Jim Carrey finally entered Hollywood, his rise was fast and explosive. In just a few years, he went from sleeping in a van to becoming the highest-paid comedic actor in the world. His movies smashed records, and producers lined up to offer him roles. Everyone wanted a human cartoon who could turn any scene into a tornado of unstoppable laughter. But behind the cameras, Jim was starting to feel something unsettling, something nobody expected from the man who made the world laugh. With each new movie, the pressure grew heavier. Every success brought even more expectations. People saw Jim as a machine of happiness, someone who could never slow down, never be tired, never show weakness. And soon, Jim realized that the world wasn't just enjoying his comedy, it was demanding it. During interviews, he once admitted that fame felt like wearing a mask he couldn't take off. At times, he felt he was performing even when he wasn't on stage. When crowds cheered for him, he smiled. But deep inside, he wondered if anyone truly knew him beyond the characters he played. He began feeling empty after movies wrapped, struggling to connect with the world around him. The laughs were loud, but his silence afterward felt even louder. He described fame as a giant spotlight that shows everyone except you. At 61, Jim now openly says that these years of pressure push him into a deep emotional battle. He struggled with depression for long periods, something the public never saw because he hid it so well. The man who entertained millions was quietly falling apart behind closed doors. And this is a part of the story many fans had suspected, but never fully knew until he admitted it himself. Jim Carrey has spoken about one moment in his life that shattered him so deeply he thought he would never recover. It was the loss of someone close to him, someone who had supported him when he felt most alone. After this tragedy, Jim fell into one of the darkest periods of his life. He isolated himself, stopped doing interviews, and avoided public events. The man known for his big, bright personality disappeared almost overnight. Fans and media speculated, sensing something was wrong. And they were right. Jim later revealed that the pain from this loss broke something inside him that comedy couldn't fix. He struggled to sleep, struggled to eat, and struggled to feel anything at all. Even when he forced a smile, his eyes showed the truth. He was hurting deeply. At 61, Jim finally admitted that during this period he questioned everything, including his career, his identity, and even his purpose on Earth. This was the moment in his life when he realized that fame doesn't protect you from heartbreak. It just hides it long enough for people to forget you are human. Many fans suspected for years that Jim's sudden disappearance from Hollywood meant something serious had happened. Now, we know they were right in a recent interview. Jim Carrey revealed something that shocked many people, even those who followed him closely. He admitted that for most of his life, he used comedy not to express joy, but protect himself from the sadness he carried. He explained that every character he ever played, whether wild, funny, or ridiculous, was born from an emotional place inside him that was searching for peace. He even said that Jim Carrey, the superstar personality the world knows, was never the real him. It was a character he created to survive the world's expectations. He said he felt like two different people. The man people saw on screen and the quiet, thoughtful soul inside who wanted to escape the noise of fame. For decades he fought to keep these two identities separate, but over time the pressure became too much. At 61, Jim finally admitted that the real reason he stepped away from Hollywood was because he couldn't pretend anymore. He needed to discover who he was without the cameras, without the applause, and without the demand to constantly be funny. His confession confirmed what many suspected, that his sudden retirement wasn't about losing opportunities. It was about saving himself. And in his own words, "I didn't walk away from Hollywood. I walked back toward myself." Behind Jim Carrey's cheerful public image, he was fighting a long and painful battle with mental health. He revealed that for years he experienced depression so intense that he sometimes felt trapped inside his own mind. There were days when he couldn't get out of bed and days when he felt like the world was closing in on him. Fans who watched him on talk shows and red carpets never noticed anything wrong because Jim was a master at hiding pain. He had spent his entire life learning how to perform, how to make people laugh, how to distract others from seeing his real emotions. But depression doesn't care about fame or success. It doesn't care how loved you are. It strikes quietly and deeply. At 61, Jim explained that he finally understood that he needed to stop pretending everything was okay. He needed help, rest, and time for healing. He also revealed that meditation, art, and spending time in nature became powerful tools that helped him regain balance. What shocked many people was how long he kept this struggle hidden. Fans had always suspected something was wrong during his quiet years, but now they finally know the truth behind his disappearance. Today, Jim Carrey is living a completely different life. He no longer spends his days on movie sets or attending high-pressure Hollywood events. Instead, he focuses on painting, writing, and helping others understand mental health. He has learned to enjoy peaceful mornings, quiet walks, and moments of stillness, things he never had time for during his fast-paced career. One of the biggest changes Jim made was letting go of his attachment to being a celebrity. He said he no longer needs fame or applause to feel valuable. Instead, he wants to live as a normal human being, not as a character the world expects him to be. Jim now uses his story to help others understand an important message. You can be successful, talented, and admired and still feel lost inside. He says the biggest lesson he learned is that you must love yourself even on the days when you feel broken. Fans had long suspected that Jim's heart was too gentle for Hollywood's harsh environment. And now, at 61, he has finally confirmed it. For years, people watched Jim Carrey's interviews and sensed something deeper behind the laughter. His moments of serious reflection, his sudden spiritual insights, and his philosophical speeches made many people wonder if he was going through something heavy. Some fans believed he was searching for inner peace. Others believed he was carrying emotional scars from his difficult childhood. And many believed he was fighting depression long before he admitted it. At 61, Jim says his fans were right. He was struggling, he was exhausted, and he was trying to find meaning in a world that constantly demanded he entertain them. Now that the truth is finally out, people are seeing Jim Carrey in a new light, not just as a comedian, but as a survivor, someone who walked through darkness without losing his ability to make others smile. He says the reason he decided to open up now is because he wants people to know that even those who seem the happiest can be fighting silent battles. And he hopes that by sharing his story, others will find the courage to speak about their own struggles too. In his newest public talks, Jim Carrey shares a message that is simple but powerful. You are enough. He believes that many people suffer because they try too hard to become what the world wants them to be. He says he spent most of his life trying to earn approval, try to be funny, trying to be perfect, try to hide his pain so others wouldn't see it. But now he understands that real happiness comes from accepting yourself exactly as you are, even with your scars, your mistakes, and your broken pieces. He encourages people to stop chasing fame, status, or perfection and to focus instead on kindness, compassion, and inner peace. Jim says that turning 61 gave him the courage to speak honestly about everything he once hid. He no longer cares about public judgment. What matters to him now is truth, healing, and living with purpose. Fans who grew up watching him say this is the most inspiring version of Jim Carrey they've ever seen. Not the comedian, not the movie star, but the human being behind it all. And in many ways, this honesty is exactly what people always suspected he was hiding. That beneath the wild humor and endless smiles lived a soul who was hurting, searching, and trying to understand life just like everyone else. Jim Carrey may not appear in many movies anymore, but his impact on the world is stronger than ever. He inspired millions not just with his comedy, but with his courage to speak openly about pain. His story reminds us that even the biggest stars are human beings with real emotions and real struggles. His journey from poverty to fame, from laughter to heartbreak, and from depression to spiritual peace is a story that will continue to touch lives for generations. At 61, Jim Carrey has finally revealed the truth people always sensed, that behind a mask of comedy lived a man who carried more pain than most people ever knew. And by revealing this, he has given his fans something more valuable than entertainment. A message of hope, healing, and understanding. In the end, Jim Carrey's greatest performance is not a character he played on screen. It is a courage he showed by removing the mask and letting the world see the real him. At the peak of his career, Jim Carrey's life felt like a paradox. On screen, he was a whirlwind of energy, a human cartoon whose laughter echoed through theaters worldwide. Behind closed door, however, he wrestled with an emptiness few could imagine. The constant need to perform, to keep people entertained, became a cage. He admitted years later that he often felt like he was wearing a mask so heavy that it could crush him. This mask wasn't just the physical transformations he endured for roles like Ace Ventura or The Mask. It was a persona the world demanded. While the audience saw a man bursting with joy, inside, he was teetering on the edge of despair. Every laugh he provoked was a temporary reprieve from his own pain. The irony was bitter. The more the world adored him, the more isolated he became. Friends and colleagues noticed changes. Long periods of silence, sudden mood swings, a tendency to vanish for days without explanation. Yet Jim carried on, believing that if he stopped performing, if he allowed the truth of his internal battles to show, everything he had built would crumble. This tension between fame and personal survival reached a breaking point during the filming of The Truman Show. Unlike his previous projects, this film demanded a different kind of energy, subtlety, depth, and emotional authenticity. Jim threw himself into the role, immersing in Truman's world so fully that the line between actor and character blurred. Peter Weir, the director, pushed him harder than anyone ever had, insisting on dozens of takes to capture the perfect mix of realism and vulnerability. During the storm sequence, Jim faced one of the most harrowing moments of his career. As waves crashed around him and the wind threatened to pull him under, he recalled the fears and helplessness of his childhood, nights in a camper van, watching his father's spirit break under the weight of poverty, the fear that he might never escape that despair. He realized then that acting was no longer just about making people laugh. It had become a battle to survive emotionally while delivering art. The scene ended up being iconic, but it came at a personal cost. For days afterward, he could barely eat or sleep. Every memory of childhood hardship resurfaced, forcing him to confront emotions he had spent decades trying to bury behind slapstick comedy. Even as Carrey ascended to the top of Hollywood, personal relationships suffered. Romantic entanglements, friendships, and family connections were often strained by the demands of his work and his own emotional volatility. His first serious relationship after early fame ended painfully when his partner couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the unpredictable public persona he had become. The deeper issue was not fame itself, but the inability to separate his real self from the characters he inhabited. In interviews, Jim described feeling trapped inside his own body, compelled to perform even when exhausted. He often joked about this phenomenon, but beneath the humor was a raw honesty. The laughter of others had become both his lifeline and his prison. Even mundane social interactions required an act. Dinner parties, industry events, family gatherings. Jim found himself constantly calibrating reactions, gauging responses, trying to anticipate disappointment or judgment. The stress built quietly, invisibly, until it erupted in moments of panic, hallucinations, or periods of complete withdrawal. He later revealed that these episodes were not just side effect of fame, but long-standing consequences of childhood trauma compounded by decades of relentless pressure. Behind the scenes, Hollywood had its own mechanisms for managing or ignoring mental health struggles. Carrey's reliance on stimulants, prescription drugs, and sometimes alcohol was not uncommon among actors, but rarely received attention beyond whispers in the industry. Directors praised his dedication. Studios celebrated his box office numbers, and fans adored the energy he radiated. Yet the toll on his mind and body was immense. Jim admitted that there were nights he could not sleep for more than a few hours, and mornings when even opening his eyes felt like a monumental effort. He became hyper-aware of every sound, every comment, every critical glance. His creative genius thrived under extreme conditions, but so did his vulnerability. Some of his most memorable roles were born from these fragile, chaotic moments, and it was precisely this mix of brilliance and instability that made him one of the most compelling comedic actors of his generation. However, the question remained, how long could man sustain this dual existence before the mask cracked permanently? Carrey's journey toward understanding himself did not begin in Hollywood, but in moments of deep reflection, meditation, and eventually art. Around the early 2000s, after years of relentless work, he began exploring painting and philosophy, searching for outlets that did not require applause. The brush allowed him to express the darkness he had carried for decades, the fears, the grief, and the absurdity of life he had internalized.